And here we have Chapter 9, Section 5, Other Environmental Conditions that Affect Growth. Learning objectives. Identify and describe different categories of microbes with specific growth requirements other than oxygen, pH, and temperature, such as altered barometric pressure, osmotic pressure, humidity, and light. Give at least one example microorganism for each category of growth requirement. Microorganisms interact with their environment along more dimensions than pH, temperature, and free oxygen levels, or temperatures too, although these factors require significant adaptations. We also find microorganisms adapted to varying levels of salinity, barometric pressure, humidity, and light. Osmotic and barometric pressure. Most natural environments tend to have lower solute concentrations than the cytoplasm of most microorganisms. Rigid cell walls protect the cells from bursting in a dilute environment. Not much protection is available against high osmotic pressure. In this case, water, following its concentration gradient, flows out of the cell. This results in plasmolysis, the shrinking of the protoplasm away from the intact cell wall, and cell death. This fact explains why brines and layering meat and fish in salt are time-honored methods of preserving food. Microorganisms called halophiles, salt-loving, actually require high salt concentration for growth. These organisms are found in marine environments where salt concentrations hover at 3.5%. Extreme halophilic microorganisms, such as the red alga Dunaliella salina and the archaeal species Halobacterium in this figure, grow in hypersaline lakes such as the Great Salt Lake, which is 3.5 to 8 times saltier than the ocean, and the Dead Sea, which is 10 times saltier than the ocean. Dunaliella species counters the tremendous osmotic pressure of the environment with a high cytoplasmic concentration of glycerol and by actively pumping out salt ions. Halobacterium species accumulates large concentrations of potassium and other ions in its cytoplasm. Its proteins are designed for high salt concentrations and lose activity at salt concentrations below 1 to 2 moles. Although most halotolerant organisms, for example Halomonas species in salt marshes, do not need high concentrations of salt for growth, they will survive and divide in the presence of high salt. Not surprisingly, the Staphylococci, micrococci, and Corynebacteria that colonize our skin tolerate salt in their environment. Halotolerant pathogens are an important cause of foodborne illnesses because they survive and multiply in salty food. For example, the halotolerant bacteria Staphylococcus aureus, Bacillus cereus, and Vibrio cholera produce dangerous enterotoxins and are major causes of food poisoning. Microorganisms depend on available water to grow. Available moisture is measured as a water activity, a subscript W, which is a ratio of the vapor pressure of the medium of interest to the vapor pressure of pure distilled water. Therefore, the AW of water is equal to 1. Bacteria require high AW, 0.97 to 0.99, whereas fungi can tolerate drier environments. For example, the range of AW for growing Aspergillus species is 0.8 to 0.75. Decreasing the water content of foods by drying, as in jerky, or through freeze drying or by increasing osmotic pressure, as in brines and jams, are common methods of preventing spoilage. Microorganisms that require high atmospheric pressure for growth are called barophiles. There we go. The bacteria that live at the bottom of the ocean must be able to withstand great pressures. Because it is difficult to retrieve intact specimens and reproduce such gross conditions in the laboratory, the characteristics of these microorganisms are largely unknown. Light. Photoautotrophs, such as cyanobacteria or green sulfur bacteria, barophiles, sorry, and, okay. Photoautotrophs, such as cyanobacteria or green sulfur bacteria, and photoheterotrophs, such as purple non-sulfur bacteria, depend on sufficient light intensity at the wavelengths absorbed by their pigments to grow and multiply. Energy from light is captured by pigments and converted into chemical energy that drives carbon fixation and other metabolic processes. The portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that is absorbed by these organisms is defined as photosynthetically active radiation, PAR. It lies within the visible light spectrum ranging from 400 to 700 nanometers and extends into the near infrared for some photosynthetic bacteria. A number of accessory pigments, such as fucoxanthin in brown algae and phycobilins in cyanobacteria, widen the useful range of wavelengths for photosynthesis and compensate for the low light levels available at greater depths of water. Other microorganisms, such as the archaea of the class Halobacteria, use light energy to drive their proton and sodium pumps. The light is absorbed by a pigment protein complex called bacteriorhodopsin, which is similar to the eye pigment rhodopsin. Photosynthetic bacteria are present not only in aquatic environments, but also in soil and in symbiosis with fungi and lichens. The peculiar watermelon snow is caused by a microalgae, Chlamydomonas nivalis, a green alga rich in a secondary red carotenoid pigment, astaxanthin, which gives the pink hue to the snow where the alga grows. And that brings us to the end of Section 5. Join me next time for Section 6, media used for bacterial growth. Until then.